So welcome to this tutorial. I'm going to be showing you how to create a React app, and this is a React application that you're going to be creating. It's a note-taking application. The first thing that you're going to do is go through Node.js installation, then React installation, creating the React application, going through the folder structure, simple state management, data handling through loops, if statements, and then we're going to create a form. This is how the notes application looks like. We have some notes on the side. When you click on a note, you can edit it. Here we're using TipTap editor, and I'm going to show you how to use it. We're using a custom font that comes from Excalibur. Excalibur is this application that I really like, that helps me create notes and drawings, and they have a nice custom font. As you can see, when someone types here, they have very nice font, so that's the font that is being used in this note-taking application. And then it has a login with Google, and it has a section for a leaderboard that shows you all the people who have created notes in this application and how many notes they have. So I'm going to go ahead and just start the tutorial. So the first thing before you do anything is ensure that you have NVM installed. So NVM is sort of a package manager that you can use to install different versions of Node.js. So you can install Node.js directly, but the recommendation here is to use the Node version manager that allows you to have multiple versions of Node. This is very helpful when you have multiple applications that use different versions of Node.js, and I found this useful when dealing with multiple projects locally. So the first thing is just visit this link, which I will include in the video description. So the first thing you will follow, if you are on Windows, you'll follow this process. Open this repository, download the exe file, and then run it. Then you can follow that process from here. If you're on macOS, Linux, you can, or any Unix based operating system, you can install the NVM by running this command. For example, on my machine, I just have the folder that I'm running the code on. You can just go here, open in terminal. This opens the terminal where we will be running our project, and then I'll copy this command. You can see that our NVM is already installed, and then once you have NVM installed, you can start by NVM install the Node version that you want to have. I already have Node version 22, which is what I'm going to be using in this tutorial. So you'll say NVM install your Node version, and then once that is done, you'll say NVM use whichever version that you want to use. Now we are going to be using Node version 22 in this project, so that is what I'm going to be running on. So once that is done, that part of the first part of the tutorial is done. So good work on that. You already done the first step. Then the second step would be to use Vite. Vite is a package bundler that is an alternative to Babel and a Create React app. So we are going to be using Vite because it's a universal package manager that is very fast and very reliable. So you're going to visit this vite.dev/guide, and then scroll down to scaffolding your first Vite project. Vite can actually be used to actually start different projects in Vue, React, Svelte, all those different frameworks, and you can use it either with TypeScript or with JavaScript. So I'm just going to copy this command and then go back to my terminal, and then down here I'm going to paste npm create Vite latest. So this will, in time as the installation is going on, I'm just going to be showing you the things that will be going on. So we've already done installation of Node.js using NVM. We've already installed React using Vite, and then we've already actually created the React application. So we are 3-way done in this process. So the application has actually already started. you can hold control or command or command on Mac to open this, or just copy the URL and open your browser, and this is the application that we are going to start with. So we just have a simple application that just has a button where you can click count and the count increases, and this will be a good place to explain to you why you would use React instead of a normal web application written in JavaScript or jQuery, if you're familiar with jQuery at this point. So the first thing is that React is used to create modern web applications, and it's way easier to use React than to use jQuery if you've interacted with jQuery before. So I'm going to go into the application and start writing some code to show you how to actually implement a React web application that looks like this form that we have, this note-taking application that we have here. So I will go back to my terminal, and on my terminal I'll just first of all close this and then go into the application. So that's my note app, cd into my notes app, and then I write code dot to open this in VS Code. You can use whichever editor that you prefer. VS Code is my editor of choice. So the public folder is used to store assets that are publicly accessible, and these assets are things like images, like logos, especially logo, favicon, and especially files that do not need to be bundled. So in this public folder, we only put simple things like the robot.txt, the favicon, maybe the logo, but any other asset that needs to be used inside the React application and that will be bundled and that needs to be optimized, like JavaScript, CSS styles, should all be stored inside the source folder. So in this public folder, you only saw files that are publicly accessible through a URL on your browser, and these are not files that need to be optimized and bundled. Then we have the gitignore. So this gitignore file is automatically created when you create using Vite, but you can actually create it yourself, and it is for storing any files that should not be posted on your Git repository. So that's your env files, the node modules, the dist folder for your bundled application, and any other files that are related to your editor. If you're using JetBrains, it should be .idea, and every other file that is just a file that should just be locally available on your machine. Then you have the ESLint config file. ESLint config stores all the linter configuration. We are not going to be going through linters in this case, so you can just ignore this file. And then we have the index.html, which we'll go through later, but is a place where your application is actually mounted. So in React, we use what is called a virtual DOM. So the main folder that's actually, or the main file that's actually processed by the browser is this index.html, and everything else that is run by the application is actually injected using JavaScript into this file directly. So inside root is where the application is actually mounted, and you can see that the main.jsx file, which is our entry point, is actually loaded as a script using a script tag in normal HTML. Then we have the package lock.json. So this is what stores the current packages that have been installed and the current version for all the packages that need to be installed. The package lock is an automatically generated file that is created when we do npm install. So the package.json is what normally we can use to modify and create the different versions of the packages that we want to use. But once you install all the packages, all the actually installed packages and their versions are stored in package log. So package log stores all the packages that we have actually installed and what version they are, to maintain consistency across the project if you're deploying the project. So make sure that the package lock file is actually uploaded onto your Git And then we have the readme, which is just the place where you specify to your readers and to anyone who's consuming your application how the application is actually supposed to be run. And the vite config.js is the Vite configuration file. As I told you, Vite is a bundler that is universally used by JavaScript applications, and you can run it, you can use it to run all sorts of applications from React to Vue and the like. So React is just one of Vite has a plugin for bundling React projects. That's why you have the defined configuration that contains a plugin for React. So that's the beginning of general structure of how the files here look like. Then we're going to go into the source folder. The source folder is where actually all your files sit. That's your file specific configurations, not configurations, but files that are related to your app. This is where they sit. And the main thing to note here is the main.jsx file. This is the main file that you need to have. This is where you import the main style sheets that are actually going to be used to run the application and style everything. Then we have this create root. So just on line 6, the main thing here is we are saying document.getElement by id root. So when you say this is a JavaScript command for accessing elements in the DOM. So we're accessing the element with id root, and in that case that element is actually this. So it's called root. You can actually change this to anything, but for now we will not change it. And then here we actually access that, we get that element, and then we are going to render our application. So the application is going to be, everything that we're going to be running is going through the app.jsx file. So we import the app.jsx file, and then we inject everything in app.jsx file to our main in the index or the main root of the DOM. So if we inspect this, we'll actually see that there's a body, there's something called id root, and you can see from here everything is actually what is inside our app.jsx file. So app.jsx file is what actually contains everything that is inside here. Now the interesting thing about React is there's a main DOM. The main DOM is mainly just these things that are actually in the index.html file, and the virtual DOM starts from here. So this is where React actually injects items inside the main DOM. So one thing, after you bundle the application and then you go to view page source, you can see that when you view the page source, what we actually see is only what is in index.jsx. There's nothing else inside this. So which means everything that is inside this root, which means now all of this, you can see there's nothing like a paragraph inside here. There's nothing like paragraph, which means that this has actually been artificially inserted, for the lack of a better word. So that's how React works. Everything that you create inside your JSX files is actually going to be injected inside the root of the HTML that we are going to be, the HTML file that we actually don't touch, which is this. So of course, when you're writing an application that requires SEO and you need to also change the title of the application, we can change this from here. So if we change this, you can see this session. So the first thing we have to do is we have to do nvm use22, which is our node version, and then we are going to do npm run dev, and then that's going to open our node our application using node.js. Then we can now reload this page and see what we see. So the title is actually changed to notes application. So that's how you can manipulate this, how the application acts. So I'll close all the files in here, and then we'll start working now on our application. So the first thing is we are going to delete everything that is inside here. We don't need this anymore, so I will delete all of that. We actually do not need the CSS, we don't need the React logo, so we can just write notes just to verify that everything that we have now is correct. So we have notes right there. So that's it, and now we are going to start actually running our application and writing our code. So before we begin, I like to always install styling using Tailwind CSS. So I'm just going to do Vite Tailwind CSS. So when you click on that, just go to the installation using Vite. We've already created the application, so I'm just going to copy this command here, then open my terminal, open a new tab, or we can just actually use the current tab that we are in, and npm install. So we install the Tailwind packages, and then once we install them, just go back here. It's saying that we should go to our vite config.ts. In this case ours is JS, since we are not using TypeScript. So I'm just going to copy this Tailwind Vite. So there's a Vite configuration that has been created. Copy that, and then part of the plugins we are going to add Tailwind CSS. So I'll just put a comma in there. Then we'll just run our application again. npm. Also, there's something else in our CSS file. We are going to do import tailwind.css. So let's go back to our index.css file. I'm going to just delete everything that's inside here and just import tailwind.css. Ensure that when you go to your main.jsx, the index.css is actually imported right here. Then we'll do npm run dev again, then go back to the main page of your notes application, and we can see something has changed. So we'll just verify the installation of this Tailwind has actually succeeded. So I will just write this, then we'll write class name. So this is how you write classes, this is how you insert classes in React.js. So we'll do text red 400, and this should change our text to a red color. So we'll not go into the basics of Tailwind here, but I'll just teach you through Tailwind as we continue this class. So the first thing that we are going to do is we need to have some notes that we can use as a starting point, so that we can start rendering this notes application correctly. And just before we do that, we are going to do very simple state management in React. So React as the name suggests, is a reactive framework that allows you to do state management without much hassle. So let's say I wanted to be able to store the list of nodes that this application is consuming, and we'll start by storing simple states. We'll start by implementing a counter, and then after we implement a counter and understand the basics of how reactivity works, then we'll go ahead and do the more complex data rendering. So the first thing is we're going to write a button. So we'll just have one button that increases the counter, which is just renders a plus button. And then here we are going to start by simple saying counter. So let's say the counter is 0. If we take this counter and then we'll do an onClick event. So the onClick event is in React is what allows us to actually click elements and increase the click elements and interact, get an onClick event and interact with elements through the onClick event. So this is how you write an onClick event. So we can say counter +1. Of course you're going to say this is wrong because you cannot modify a constant in React. So we are going to say let counter is equals to 0, and then so this is supposed to be plus equals 1. So let's just see. Then you're going to render the counter here. So let's see counter, and we'll say counter. So let's just go back. So if we click on increase, you can see nothing actually changes. If I go back to, let's say, let me just inspect and render some things around there. So just to make this look more like a button, I'm just going to give it a simple class name, give it a border, and then a padding y of 2. Let me just give padding y of 2 and a padding x of 2 as well, so that it just looks more like a button. And then just to ensure that we know that something is actually happening, I'm going to using this onClick event, I'm going to wrap this in brackets. This allows us to have multiple things inside this onClick event. So we're just going to say console.log increase counter, rather click counter, and then I just want to log the value of that counter. So I'm just going to say counter and then comma counter, just for us to see the value of that counter. So if I click on this, let me just clear this. You can see the counter is actually increasing, but the UI does not recognize that the counter has changed. That's because if we use just a normal variable in React, the page is not reactive. Rather, the page does not recognize that something has changed inside that variable. So what we need to do is we are going to solve this problem using reactivity. So in order for the page to actually recognize that something has changed, we are going to employ reactivity in React. So the first thing that I will do is I will import useState from React, and then I will wrap this in curly braces, and then what I will say is, so we'll change this into const, then this is going to be counter, and then set count, and then we'll instantiate this to a value of 0. So now we'll not be able to now set the state this way, because when you do it this way, we'll still not be able to actually view the reactivity. So if we continue clicking it, you'll actually see that it says assignment to a constant variable. So this definitely doesn't work. So we'll use set count, which is a function that just sets the actual value of the count. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say counter +1, which means I'm going to assign this value to whatever value there was +1. So if I clear this again and just increase, you can see the counter is actually increasing. And you can do this, you can do the same by creating another button for decreasing the count. So let's say we want to decrease the count. We will put this as a minus. This will just be -1, and then if we click on this and decrease, you can see the counter is actually continuing to decrease. So of course there's something that you can actually notice from here, in that we are duplicating code, which is not something that you're supposed to be doing technically. So we are going to transform this into a function that can be called by either of these functions, by either of these buttons. So here we are going to define a reusable function. So we're going to say const change counter, and then this change counter is going to be an arrow function. Just opens up, it accepts two things. So it's accepting the value of the change. So the change counter, we know we are just adding one most of the time, so we don't need to pass the actual value, but we are going to pass whether it's the type, whether it's an increase or a decrease, and then we are going to pass the value. So technically we can have two functions, one for increasing and one for decreasing, but there is no. So I'll just go tell this the type of change, and this I'm just going to use a default of plus or minus, and then the value that you want to change that counter to. So I'm just going to take set count, and then the set count, we are going to take the actual counter, and then we'll say counter plus the value. So this is the value that you want to change this by. So we have the type of change, which is an increase or a decrease. Then we have the value by which we want to change this. Then this is all we need. So we are going to just have an if statement. So if type of change is equals to plus, then we will do a plus, and then else we will. So I'm just going to add some brackets on here. I like to have brackets, not a must, but it helps whoever is looking at the code to find it easier to read. So we'll have this if statement, and then we can use, if it's not that, then it's a minus. Then we'll change this on click event here, and then we will say that this is a change counter. The first thing, we are going to pass the type of change. In this case, this type of change is a plus, and the value is 1. Then I will just copy this and then change the same here. Now this is going to be minus. So sorry, I'll make this a minus, and then we're going to make this one. So we can just make this very simple, but let's just keep this as is to the UI here. So when I clear this out, so we can see we have an error. We have an error that says too many renders. React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop. So if we go back here, this is an error that you may encounter quite frequently in React, and you will see the reason why this error occurs is because we have just called the function directly. And the best thing to do when you encounter an error like this, just make this an arrow function, and then this now should work. So if we clear, now we can see it opens up. You can actually increase, and then you can actually also decrease. So that's how you can write simple functions and simple state management using React, and how to call functions with the on-click event handler. So you have a basic understanding of how this should work. Now the next step in this case is we're going to define some nodes, and we'll start by just creating those nodes, and then we are going to render them. So the first thing here is we are going to define this by, I'm going to digress here a bit and create a a repository for this application so that you can just go ahead and follow through. So if you know the basics of Git, you can just skip this section, but now here I'm going to just talk about how we can use Git for this in order to keep track of our files. So I'm just going to open this up, open a new terminal, and then write Git in it. So that initializes an empty Git repository. Just go back and ensure that your Git ignore is correctly written up and everything is ignored, especially the node modules, which contains all the application, all the packages that have actually been installed, and it's a file that we can always generate by doing npm install rather. So we initialize an empty Git repository, and then we're going to add all the files. So git add dot, and then git commit -m. So this is simple state management. Then I'll just clear everything up. Then I will create a new branch. So git checkout, so minus b, which says create a new branch. So the new branch that we are going to use here is called lesson 1 simple state. Then I'm going to push origin lesson 1 simple state management. Okay, I understand what's happening here is that we haven't specified the URL that we are going to be pushing to. So I'm just going to clear and then my browser. So in this browser of mine, I'm just going to say git remote add origin. So we'll just copy this origin URL. Then once we add this origin URL, now we can actually push our branch. So that's it. Once the code is pushed, you can actually now go and start looking at lesson 1. So once you're done with lesson 1, I'm just going to clear and say git checkout -b lesson 2. So this is called data handling. Let me just call it data handling, which makes it a very simple process for us to follow. So I'm going to clear everything out. Clear these functions that we have just created. And now I'm going to create the data for the nodes. So as we have learned, we'll create all the nodes and then set nodes. And then this node is going to use useState. And then here we are actually going to describe the initial state for how our nodes are going to look like. So as you can tell, this should be an array. It's an array of objects. So the array of objects contains the nodes and how each node should look like. So we have the title of the node. This is my first node. Then we are going to have the contents of the node. So those are the contents of the node. Then we can just have a second node, and we can have a third node. This is my third node, and that's it. Then now we are going to actually render the nodes on the page. So if we go here, I would like to just wrap this in a div, and then now I'm going to actually render the nodes using a for loop. So we are going to be learning the basics of using for loops in React. So this assumes that you have some prerequisite knowledge in writing for loops using JavaScript mainly. So the first thing is I'm going to define this as a UL, and then I'll make this into a list. So the first thing here is we're just going to copy this so that I show you what we would like to do, and then write this into actually I do not like ULLI. I actually think that we can do this just using normal paragraphs and just render this thing as a list. Then we have the contents of the note. So we have that, and then we'll just go back to our user interface, which is this, the notes application. You can see it just shows the list of the notes. Of course, you'll say that this makes no sense since we actually have the data of the notes, and that you'll be right. But I would use this just to do a simple styling for this flex call, and then I will just wrap this into specific items. Like I'll just make this and then make this into a CRUD. Then I'll just give a gap of 2 for each of these items. So it doesn't make much sense, but this is what we'll just go with. Just simple styling that makes this look like it's actually a note. Then now this next thing will be to loop through this item so that we can actually render the data here. So the first thing that we are going to do is we'll collapse this into a curly brace, and then after collapsing that into a curly brace, we are actually now going to create the loop that we are going to follow. So we'll say we have notes dot map, and then as we are mapping through these items, we need to have a way of accessing the note that we are looping through. So we're just going to say note, and then open these brackets. Then I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it there. So this will show you now, this is a note and this is a title. So we are going to say note. So we'll say note dot title and note dot content. So this will show us the contents of the notes, and we'll be able to actually just loop through. So it says this is my first note, my second note, and my third note. So I just want to show you something on the console. So we have each child list should have a unique key prop. Anytime you see this error, it shows you that React requires each of these elements to actually have a unique key. So let me just go through this. You'll see that there's nothing that identifies these elements, and React uses this in its render process. So I'm going to wrap this into a curly brace like this, and the next thing I'm going to write is index. So I can make this have unique keys by saying key and then index. So we're just going to go back. Of course, nothing shows up, nothing has changed, but when we go back and just refresh this, we can see that there's no error now. The other thing that I would like to see in the notes is, at least I would like them to be numbered. So I can number them using the index, but of course when you do that, the index is going to start from 0. So we need to have index plus 1, and then we can put a dot there and say, okay, this is my first note and now this is my second note. So we actually don't need this. We actually don't really need the border because it just makes everything look uglier. So I will just wrap this into a container using a container, and then so that everything just goes into the center. So I'm going to wrap everything in a div. So going to wrap this into a container, and then make this flex, make the height to occupy the whole screen, and then we'll say item center, and then justify center, so that now everything just comes onto the center. It makes they're just easier to see when they are on the center. So this is now what we've been able to come up with. We've looked through the items and we can actually see them, which makes it now quite interesting. So now one thing that you can see is, yes, we do have some initial notes, but now the next thing is we need to actually create notes in this section. So I'll go back again to my Git. I'll push the changes that I have. The best practice when you're using Git is to push as little changes as possible, so that it allows you to actually roll back the changes in case an error, in case you want to go back to a feature that you added. So git add dot git commit -m. So we've added a JSON notes. Then I'm going to actually change this to so now this is lesson. So we've actually already we've now pushed all the changes to for lesson 2 in data handling. So this is supposed to be git push origin lesson 2 data handling. So that's it. So we are done with that section. Now we are going to go into form handling. You can actually use the command line for the git commands, or you can actually use this and create a new branch. So this is lesson 3, and this for lesson 3 we are going to be learning about how to use forms. So when you're learning how to use forms, we are going to be just creating a form that allows us to create a new item, delete a new item, delete an item, and edit the items that we currently have. So since we've already learned about functions, we can actually implement a delete functionality. So on each of these items, I'm going to add a button called delete. So on this delete button, of course it doesn't look like a delete button. We'll just make it add some simple classes. So we'll just put a border, and then rounded md px2 py2. We actually make the py to be 1. Then just mark it, instead of delete, just write x. Okay, and then we'll make the text red 500 or red 400. Yeah, it just looks like a destructive action. Then just to make sure that these are in the same line, I'm going to wrap this in a div. Then I'll make them so flex, and then we say flex row. So this put the items in a row, and then we justify between, so that it forces the items to be far apart. If we go back, at least there's a difference, and then we'll put a gap of 2. And then we'll do item center to ensure that everything is in the center line, so that it doesn't look so bad. So we'll put in the X button that allows us to delete a note. We are going to create a function. So we'll say const delete note. And then when we're deleting the note, I'll just create an arrow function. We'll need to accept the note that is being deleted by it in its index. And then as we are deleting this note, we need to pass the note, and then we'll use a JavaScript method, an array method. So I'll just put the notes into a new array. So let's current notes be equal to notes, and then I'm going to say current notes dot splice. Splice is an array method, and you can see the documentation for that method. So the start number, so which is the index, and the delete count, we're just going to be deleting one note. And then once we are done, so this we've just deleted a note inside this current nodes. So we need to set nodes to the new node that we've just, to the new array of nodes that we've just created. So by that, we are going to use, to do that, you're going to use the spread over operator. You're just spreading all the nodes that we have into the new nodes. So let me just go back, copy the delete node function. So on click, we're going to call that function using that arrow function delete node, and then we pass the index. So let me just recap what I did. So I created a function for deleting nodes where you pass the index of the node that will be deleted, and then you put all the nodes that you have into a new array called current nodes. And then we are using the splice method to delete an index, to delete a node at this index. And then we will use this function for set nodes to actually modify the value of nodes into the value of nodes to carry out all the current nodes, that which includes the element that we've just deleted. So that's how you can actually delete a node. So let's go back. If we click on this, you can see it's actually deleting, and that's all fine. So you will notice that this actually works, and we can actually delete. Here we are going to use form, and then inside the form we are going to use inputs. So I'll just wrap them in a div, and then specify a label. So for this label, maybe it's going to be the node title, and then an input. On this input is going to be, we're going to give it an ID of title. Then we need to make it auto closed, and then the type will be text. That's it for that title. And then we'll need to create a description. So for this, instead of creating a note like this, we are going to have a text area. So for text area, you can define the number of rows in a text area, like let's say 4. So this will be the contents of the note. Then in a text area, you don't need to specify whether it's a type of text or not. So you can see, of course, this look really weird because there's no styling that we have added. So I'll just add a simple styling just to make this look a bit better. So class name, make them flex, and flex call. So that makes sure that things are aligned in a column. Then the second thing that we are going to do is we are going to style each of the elements so that the label is at the top and the text or the input is below it. So for that, we'll do class name flex column. Then we'll give them a gap of 2. Then we'll have the label. Then on the input, we'll have just a few classes. We'll give it a border. and a padding x of 2, so that there's a x padding and a padding y of 2 as well. So if we go back, at least this looks a bit better, more presentable, and then the corners are too sharp, so we'll say rounded MD. So that makes it just a bit more rounded, which makes it easier to look at. I will just copy this styling here on class name, that, then the labels are still not too bad. The other thing we need to just have is this styling for the classes right there, so that doesn't look so bad. And then the final thing is we need a button. So this button, let's say save note, and it's going to have some classes that just makes it a bit easier to read also. I'll just copy these same classes here, and yeah, you can see how it looks, but it's too big, so I'm just going to say width min, which means it will just have the minimum width, but that's not the correct width, so we can just say fit, which makes it fit to the items that we have here. So one of the things that I would just want is to have a gap in these items, so I'm just going to have a gap of 2, which ensures that these items have a considerable gap back, so at least this looks way more presentable. And the next thing is now we need to attach the items back. We need to attach these inputs to actual values. So for that, we are going to create a second some further states. So the first state is we are going to say const title, and then set title, and then for this we are going to have useState. Then this is going to have a blank string. I'll duplicate that using Command D or Control D. Then this is going to be the contents, and this is going to be set contents, and it's going to have a useState of blank as well. So this title, we are going to actually set the value of this title. So let's say value is equals to title, and value here is equals to contents. So that's it about setting the values. Then the second thing, I just want to display whatever is on those values somewhere, so that it's just easier for us to show it. So I'll say title, and then I'll put in contents, then I'll just copy these two, title and contents. Let me just put in, you can have multiple cursors by actually using option and clicking on the sections where you want to put in the cursors. So right now there's nothing, and you will notice as you type, you actually can't type, and the reason for that is this error that you're seeing here. We provided a value prop onto a form without an onChange handler. This will render a read-only field. If the field should be able to be mutable, use default value, otherwise set either onChange or read-only. So what that error is just telling us is that we need to provide a function to tell us what happens when someone actually types. So that is going to be what we call an onChange handler, and inside the onChange handler is just a normal function. It has a default value that a default argument that is an event, so we can just call this event, but typically the standard is just to call it E. And then we're going to write an arrow function, and then this arrow function just tell us, okay, what are you going to put in this function, or what are you going to actually now set the value for this to be. So E has a lot of things inside of it. So I'll just say console.log, and then we are going to log E so that we see what is actually in E. So I'm just going to say console. If you write log, by the way, it actually auto-completes to console.log. So we'll say title changed, and then under it you're going to console log E. So if we type, you can see of course nothing changes, but you have this thing called a synthetic base event. So in JavaScript you have normal events. So the event that we are handling here is what is called an input event. So in this case, React creates what is called a synthetic event, which is just a wrapper that React uses, and then inside of it you can actually, if you open it, you can see the native event that we are using, which is then an input event. And of importance is event.target. So event.target actually shows us the element that we were writing the input inside. So we have target, and then we have that value. So right now this was the first time that we typed in, so there was nothing inside there. But if we go to the last event, let's see what will be inside target.value. So let's write something and then console log the value, and then we see what we will actually find inside there. Title change, then we'll say e.target.value. So we are going to take whatever the user typed, and then now we are going to set that value to the element, to the state variable that we are using to track this. So we'll say set title, and then we'll set the title to e.target.value. So now let's go back, clear this out. You can see the title.value is actually showing the value that we are typing. And if I just reduce this so that we can see, you can see the title is actually being changed. So we just need to do the same for the second element. I'll give you a few seconds so that you can write this on your own before I show you how the solution looks like. Okay, great. So I will do the same here. So I will encourage you to type this out yourself. So here it's on change, and then on change is a function. We're going to pass e, open the brackets, then we will say set contents, and then it's going to be e.target.value, and that's it. So if we go back to say title and description, now we have both our title and our description, and all of them now make sense. So I'm just going to delete this because we don't need it any longer. Now the final thing is we have this button. So I'm just going to say type is a submit button, and then I'm going to have an event here that says on submit. So the on submit function is actually going to submit the form. So we already know that instead of writing logic here, it's always best to create a function. So I will say const submit form, and then down here we'll do submit form, copy the form, then we'll just call submit form. Since there's no data that we are passing, we can just call it that way. So just console.log submitting the form. Then I'm just going to just log the values inside the form that we are submitting. That's the title and contents. So let me just go back, console that, and then you can see something actually changed. So let's just fix this error. We have I'm just going to write class and then click on this to find the full word. So here it is. So let's fix that. Now we go back to here, try and submit. If you looked very closely, you can see that this page actually reloads every time we click on save note, and it does that because that's the default behavior for form submission in JavaScript. So if you have ever written any form in HTML before, you know that the onSubmit event handler normally was just submit forms, and when you click on it, you submit and then you show the result of the page. So instead of that, we would like to prevent that default behavior by .target .prevent default. So that prevents the submit default behavior. This is incorrect. This is e.prevent default. So let me just go back, save note. So the behavior is still happening because we haven't passed e when you're actually doing the form submission. So I'm going to pass e, submit form, and that should fix the behavior. So I realized what the mistake was. The mistake is that if we do this, how the browser actually interprets this and actually interprets this is that if you do this, you are actually returning submit form without actually calling it. The right way to do this would be to say e and then pass e again there. Let's go back. So now it works as expected, but an easier way altogether would just be to simplify this by writing it as such. If we write this, now we save the note, you can see it's actually submitting and it's actually showing us the values of the note. So now the final thing to do in our submit note function is we need to insert the values of our note into this array of notes. So what we are going to do is create a constant new note, and this new note is just something that shows the title and the contents. So we can write title contents and just delete contents like that. And then what we are going to do is we'll say set notes, then we are going to use the spread operator, copy all the notes we currently have, then add the new note there. So if we load our page again, so if we see our note is actually being created there. New description. So that's it. You've actually now succeeded in creating a note application. We can delete all the notes. So not title, not description, not title 2, not description 2, and that's it. So the only problem that I would like to solve here is we have a problem, because this, every time someone creates save new note, the data still remains there, which could be quite annoying if you want to create new notes the next time but write new content. So for now, I'm going to delete everything that was in our default data. Then the second thing that we are going to do after that is, after someone submits the new note this way, by the way, a simpler syntax for this is we can delete the title and the contents. That's if this and this are the same, you can just delete one of them and JavaScript will just infer this directly. So we can now set the title to an empty array, and we can set the contents to an empty string, and set this to an empty string as well. So title and then description. That's it. So we've successfully created notes, we successfully deleted them. Now the final thing would be to edit a note. So let's just think through the functionality first, and this is how you're supposed to approach any problem when you are writing any application. So think about edit functionality. So the edit functionality, basically how it works is, and I will just go ahead here and do a drawing, is that we have a note. So let's say, we have a note that we can think of it like this is a note and this is the title. So that's the place for creating the titles and the notes. But then we also have this place where we are actually rendering like the notes. So notes 1. So we need to be able to click on a button. So that button is like an edit button that's just shows it's just an edit, like a pencil icon. Think of this as a pencil icon. So when you click on the pencil icon, what we want is, we want the contents of this note to basically be appended here, and then we'll need to have a button, and then this button is going to be like a save button. So what we need to do is pass the specific note and save it inside there. So how are we going to do that? We'll go back to here. So we have this button for on click delete note. So now this is going to be edit note. We're going to just pass the index. Now this is not going to be red, it's going to be green, and it's not going to be an X. So we'll just call it edit. And if I go back to my interface and open this note, we have now edit function. Of course, when you click on it, edit note is not defined because we have not created this function yet. So we'll go back here and say const edit notes. We'll pass the index of the note that we're going to edit. And then now the next part would be to take the value of the note that we've edited and the value of the note that we just clicked, and ensure that it's correct, and ensure that it's rendered on the inputs. So we are going to say const note is equals to notes, and then on the actual notes item we are going to say give me the note at that index, and then we'll say title is equals to note.title, and then we are going to say set title, going to set it to that, and set contents, we are going to set it to that value. So dot contents. So we know that is the case because we know how the data looks like. So let me just go back. So if we click on edit, you can see it shows up here. So the only problem now is when we edit the note, let's delete this one. When you edit this note and save it, it actually creates a new note, which is not what we want. The process would be that when someone clicks on save note and we're actually editing a note, we would change the value of that note in the array. So how do we do that? We need to track whether a note is actually being edited or being created. So I'm going to save a new state. So is editing, const is editing, then set is editing, I use state, and then by default is going to be false. Then when you're saving the form, that's when someone clicks on the actual save button, you're going to ensure that the editing mode, you're going to check whether it's an editing mode or a creating mode. So when someone clicks on edit note, the first thing that we'll need to do is set is editing to true. So we'll know that now we're in edit mode. So that when someone is submitting a new form here, we are going to say if edit mode, if is editing, then we are going to do editing things, else we are going to be doing we'll do the data, we'll set the data to a new note and a new note here. So in the editing status, what you're going to be using is we're going to be okay. So in edit mode, we are going to be saying, so we'll say that edited note to be, now instead of this we can actually just say set notes so let new notes be just the current value of all the notes, and then we'll say new notes at whichever index that we are editing. So number one, we need to find out, okay, we are currently editing, but which index are we editing? So the user passed edit note and passed the index, so we need to save which index the user is editing. So const edit index, and then we'll say set edit index, use state, the index now here we're going to be, it's going to be null. So edit note, the second thing here is you're going to be set editing index, and we'll pass the index, and then the last thing here is if you're editing, you're going to be using the edit index. So new notes, the edit index is actually going to be the value of the new note, which is technically the note that we've just edited. Now once you've done that, we are going to say set notes, and then now set notes, we're actually just going to be setting the value of the notes to the new notes, and that's it with the editing thing. And the final thing that we need to do is we need to set editing to false, and we need to set edit index to actually go back to null. So once that is done, we'll set some values there. So set edit index to be null, is editing should be false, and then the edit index should be null because we are not editing any index right now. So new note, and we'll say new note contents, and then we'll save note. So if we click on edit note, new note title, new note content changed, then we save note. So now the note has been edited. The final functionality that I would like us to add is a duplicate functionality, a functionality that allows us to actually copy the value of the note into a new note. So I'm just going to duplicate this and then write duplicate note, and then we'll change this to duplicate text orange, and then we'll say duplicate. So of course, as usual, I would like for you to implement this on your own first before actually looking at what we've done, just to ensure that you've understood. Index, then this is going to be an arrow function, and we will take whatever index that you're duplicating. So we will say take all the current, we'll take this current node. So I'm just going to copy this. So this is a node that we are currently duplicating, and what we will need to do is we'll just say const nodes. So this is the current nodes, and you're going to be saying that this is equal to nodes. Then we will say current nodes dot push, then we'll add this new node. Then now we are going to say, just as we have done before, we'll copy this and set this to current nodes. So if we go to, this is the title of the note, description of the note, save the note, duplicate it once again, and then we can change this, we can change the note. So that's how you can implement the duplicate functionality, the edit functionality, and that's it for this slide. So now we're going to learn about useEffect and what it does in React. So let's just go back to our application. So this is our application. So let's say you wanted to check or keep track of every time the title actually changes or every time the description changes. Now that would be quite difficult without using what is called a hook, and useEffect is one of the hooks that just changes. Hooks are just functions in React. So let's think about how you would do that. So you'll just go back ahead and import this useEffect hook directly from React, and then we'll say useEffect. Then the first part is going to be function, so it's just an arrow function in the dependency array. So the arrow function part, this contains whatever you want to run, and the dependency array part just contains the items that you want to keep track of. So let's say we wanted to keep track of the title, so that every time the title changes, we actually show something on the page. So here we can just use console log, just say title changed. So if we go back to this page here and inspect, every time we change the title, we can see something that says title changed, and we can actually keep track of the actual title there and see what happens. Every time the title changes, you can actually see something has changed. We can keep track of two things. We can also keep track of contents, and we can say title or content changed. So we can keep track of both items, and anytime either of them changes, we can actually see that it's actually being console logged on down there. So this is how useEffect can be used. We can also have multiple useEffects. So I'm just going to copy this useEffect and say put a dependency array, and the dependency array in this case is just going to be an empty array. So why an empty array? An empty array is just to keep track of if something just shows like an empty array has, like something, the page has actually been loaded or it has actually been mounted. So this useEffect that has an empty array will render something every time like the page has been mounted. So that's what you're going to be using today to fetch our notes. So I'm going to just take this URL and define it as a constant in API URL. Then we are going to make it a function. So I'll just get rid of this since we don't need it anymore, and we're going to say const fetch notes, and fetch notes is going to be an arrow function that is just uses a fetch API. So fetch and then API URL. Then since it returns a promise, we'll say dot then we'll say a response. So the response here is going to be data. So we are going to say res, and then we'll take this res and just say .json. So it's a response.json. So this response.json actually returns a promise. So we can write another dot then. So we are chaining this then we'll say it can be, you can call it anything. This data doesn't really mean anything. You can call it whatever you want. We can now say console.log, and then we log the result. So there's the resulting data, and then now this is going to be data. Then we'll say dot catch, so we'll catch any errors, and then here is going to be console.log, an error has occurred, so we'll just show the error. So that's how we are going to be using this. Of course, it's not going to be called since we haven't called it. So let's call it fetch notes. Let's just see now what happens. So if we reload this page, we can see that the data is saying undefined. Now we have to go back and see what happened. So we don't need this since it's just, first of all, since this is just it's a one-liner, we can get rid of this. So let me just correct that first. Console.log data. There is nothing seems to be wrong there. So let's just go back again. Okay. So the reason why this was actually not showing is when you put in the curly braces, then you have to put in a return statement. So because this just returns a promise, but if we put in the curly braces this way, we'll have to write return so that it shows the same data. Yeah, and now it worked. So you don't need this exactly, so you can just keep it this way. That fixes the problem. So now that we have the data, we can just look at what it does. There's some data inside there, and this is a structure. If you go to network, move this up a little bit. If we go to the data and just reload this, we'll see that an API call has been made. You can switch this from all to fetch xhr to just filter this to the data here, and that's going to show the data correctly. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually show this data in the notes. So how do we do that? Now we have this data that we are console logging here. We can take it and then insert it into the notes. So we have this set notes. We have the notes defined as here, and then we have the set notes. So what I'm going to do is I will take this data in the then statement set notes, and then just set the whole data like that. So set nodes and then just dump everything inside there. Now let me just see what happens. So if I load this, you can see that there's something happened. Number one, the first thing is we can see the title, but there's no description. And you would ask yourself, why is there no description? Of course, it's because that our code here in this loop that we have, it expects note.contents, but there is nothing in note.content because as you can see in our console here, the only data that's being shown is we only have a body. So we need to transform this somehow, and the best way to transform this is to transform this in the API where the data is actually being stored. So the best way that I would do this is write another const. So I will say I will put this data into I would say data.map, and I would declare const, or rather let transformed data, and then just initialize it into an empty array. Then I would say data.map, and then loop through each item, and then on each item I would say transform data.push, and then I would actually construct my array in the format in which I want. So the format that I want is I want a title. So the title should contain item.title, then contents, then I will say item.post in this case because it's actually called post, and then I will now use set nodes and set the nodes to the transform data. For reactivity, the best way is always to copy everything in whatever array value you're copying it into and transform it and set the whole array from a copy of that item. That ensures that React is always looking for reactivity and everything gets to be sent. So let's look at the data that we have transformed. We have transformed contents. This is title, content, and I think we spelled the items wrong. Okay, it's notes.contents, which is correct. Notes.contents, which is correct, and we set notes to the transformed data. So one way that I do when I'm not able to debug and see what the problem is I usually go back to the code here and go back to where I'm actually rendering these nodes and just write the whole JavaScript, like just show the whole data there. So of course you can't show this. If you try and write this, you will get this issue. Objects are not valid as a React child. So React doesn't recognize JSON when you're rendering data. So you can just write JSON.stringify nodes, and then that will just show you the actual data. Of course you can't see it because we have a scroll issue here. So what I will need to do here is I'll just say overflow y, and this should be scroll instead of auto. Then I will need to make this whole element just occupy the full height of the container. Okay, yeah. So now we can see this data. So if we look at this, we can see that we have a problem, and the problem is that we have only the title is actually being sent on, is actually being put in. So we have only title, but there is no description. So we need to look at this and see what's the problem. So we can see we're saying item.post. So if we go back here and just look at, so it's actually body, not post. So that's how you would go about debugging an issue if you had a problem and yeah, you can see the content is now being rendered, and yeah, you can see the content is being showed. So there are a couple of styling problems, and I think now it's time for us to fix them. So this thing is too big, so let's make it just occupy a third of the width. So let's make it occupy just a third of the width, and let me remove this, and now you can see it looks a bit better, and you can scroll. Now the other thing is, we don't want to show the whole body, we just want to show a snippet of the body. That's a bit it's a bit cleaner. So in order for us to write this in Tailwind, you can just write these classes: overflow hidden, text ellipsis, white space, no wrap, and then truncate. So that will make sure that the lines, you will just show one liner, and then multiple, just a dot that shows, okay, that's the content. So it makes things a bit easier to read. So will now go ahead and just ensure that this looks better, and the edit and other buttons are a bit easier to reach. So for us to do that, I think the best thing is to make this wrap into a column. Then now I'll make this me wrap this into a div. Then we'll write this flex, so this flex row, then width full, and justify between. So this makes at least the item look a bit more organized, and I'll increase the width of this whole thing. Right now it's just covering, let me just make it cover half, makes it a bit look a bit better. And then for the notes, I think it's wise to just make them cover only the full width, so that they don't there's no scrolling on the x-axis. So I'll just make that width full, and then overflow x hidden. That makes it okay, let's just leave it like that for a moment. We'll figure that out later. Okay, so let's make this look a bit better. So class name, flex, gap of 2, make it occupy the full width, then justify between, which forces the elements to just occupy this full width, but actually don't think I like that. Let me just keep it back. Then the other thing is, I think I actually do not like this, so I'm just going to give it a height of 10. Actually just forget that. Then we're going to make this sub str 0, and then 100. Then we're just going to put the ellipses there. So that's a bit long, so let's make it 50. Okay. Then I think text wrap. Okay, let's just leave it like that. Just one last thing, I think it would be better to wrap this to make this into a CRUD. So just put it a border, but we'll just keep it border 1, border, and then bg gray, just put it a gray of 50, put this a gap of 2, so that they have a spacing between them. then make this border very small, 0.5, and then we are going to make them rounded MD, and you just give them a small shadow. Okay, not such a small shadow, but you just give them a shadow. On second thought, let the border be gray 50, which makes it just very faint. And I think we applied this in the wrong place. So I'm just going to cut them. Let me just leave them as is. Okay, so we have this data that's coming from the API. The other thing I would put is a loading state. So you can just show a loading state as this data is coming from the backend. So we have called this data. Now we just need to add a loading state. So I'll just duplicate this, is loading, and then set is loading, and make this false. So every time someone calls the API, we'll just do set is loading, make it true, and then we'll do a finally. So this finally, then inside here we'll set is loading to false. Then we'll just go down here and say is loading. So if it's loading, we'll just show a paragraph. So this needs to be wrapped in those braces, and then we'll say if it doesn't show, just show null. So loading, then we'll just put some states there. So if it's loading, you can see it's very quick and then it just disappears. So we don't need to. So of course this doesn't make sense to have this and null. So we can replace this with multiple ampersands that just does the same thing. So now that we have this, the last thing that we would want to do is change our editing states to actually send the data to the API when the data is actually being edited. So we have the delete node, edit node, and then duplicate node. So let's do the edit node. So what we are doing is we are taking doing this this edit, but of course this is happening on the page. What I would do is I would retain this functionality, and then I would implement the actual calling of the API. Now the reason why I would do this is these are called optimistic updates. So we hope that the API will actually, the data will actually be changed in the API and then do the update. But instead of doing an optimistic update, this is how I will do the update. So I will just, first of all, before we actually set this content here, like before we actually update the content, okay, so how do we edit the note? We'll go back to how the note is edited. It's edited through the submit form. So let's go to the submit form. So right now, the way we are submitting a form is we'll set the actual value of the nodes, but there is no API call involved. So in this case, this is how you're going to make API call. So I will write the API call inside of here, and then we will extract it and put it into a function, if that makes sense. So we are going to say const response is equals to so we are going to say await, and then we'll make a fetch, and then we'll make a fetch too. Of course, now we have to wrap this into this kind of backticks, and then say API URL, and then we are going to append this to with the value that we are editing, which is the index that we are editing. We already know the index that we are editing, which will be edit index, and then we are going to pass some options into this fetch. So one of the first option that we are going to pass is the method. So the method here is put, then comma, then we can specify the headers, which is content. I'm just going to paste this here so that it's easier. And then the body. So the body is the data that you're actually going to send. So the body here in this case is going to be JSON. So we have forgotten a comma here. JSON to stringify. And then we are going to send this one, not necessary. And then the data that we're actually sending, which is the notes which we are editing, which is this one, new notes. So I will take this, I'll comment it out for now. So the new note, and then we will say dot, then which should tell us what happens like after the data has been okay. So now we are going to implement the API for actually saving a form directly to a specific API call. So right now, as you can see, we are only sending the note directly to our state. So let's just recap what we did in the form. So there's a form that has a submit. So when the person hits the submit button, we go to on submit, we click the submit button, and the next thing is we either check if we are editing, and if you're not editing, we just send a new note. So what I will now do is when someone submits and they're actually creating a new note, we are going to implement using fetch API. So how we will do that is by first of all saying fetch. So we'll say, we can say const results is equals to fetch, and then we will pass in the API URL. So that's the API URL that we are going to pass, and then we'll pass in some options. So the first thing is the method. So the method in this case is going to be post, and then there are some headers that we would want to pass. So the first header, the headers are passed as an object. So the first thing that we're going to pass is the content type. So that's the content type that you're going to pass, and this in this case is going to be application/JSON. That's the first thing that we're going to pass. Then the last thing we're going to pass is the body. So the body in this case is going to be JSON.stringify, and then we are going to take the note that we put in there. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, and then we'll say .then we'll take the response. So this response, what you're going to do to it is response.json. So that's the first thing. The first thing is done. Then we'll say .then. Now we'll actually take the response and we can show it to the user, but in this case I don't think we really need to do that. We can just say .catch. Then if there's an error, we are going to show the user the error. So we will say console.log error, and then we are going to show the error to the user. So in this case, the variable we defined is called error. Let's fix this. So that's how we are going to send the data. Now there's something that we need to ensure that we check and we just show, but first of all let me just go back and show the code here. So we can see that we have is loading is not a function, so let's just fix that error. Line 111. So we have line 111 is loading is not a function. Yeah, so this was something that was an oversight. It's loading. If it's loading, just this braces should have been here instead. Okay, so let's see. So once we say new title description, so we say we've saved the note. If we go back, let me just look at here, new note 2, new note 3. So if we say that, we can see that the post has actually been created. Now the thing is, once you create the post, we need to show the post to the user. So how do we do that? So we go back here and say, so where's our submit function? Here's our submit function. What we are doing is we are setting notes, and the problem is that it's going to the very bottom of the stack. So instead of doing this, this will just push it to the end. We can push it to the beginning, and then everything else goes down there. So title, description, then we save the note. So you can see it's now actually being displayed at the top here. Now there's something that is wrong with this implementation, and the wrong thing with this implementation is, in an example where this actually fails, like there is a catch here that is not handled, like something goes wrong, the note will still be added to the top, and the user will have no way of knowing whether the data was actually posted or not. So how to do this is by changing this, and then we say .cat, so .then again, and then this new then this is where we're actually going to store the data. So that let's just make sure that the data will actually be, the note will actually have been created. So new title 2, new title 3, new title 3 description. So we say, you can see there's a short delay because it's waiting for the data to be saved first and then it shows it. So we need to show like a loading state just to show that something is actually happening. Now in this case, we are going to do const is saving, then this is saving, then we say set is saving, then we'll say use state, and then by default is going to be false. So when someone begins the saving process, so we'll start here. So when the saving process is set is saving to true, and then after saving is set to true, the API call begins, then we'll just say dot finally, then we'll put in an arrow function and just set is saving to false. That ensures that there's a loading state, and then we need to show that loading state here. So is saving, we can see, okay, so here the problem is that, so that's now correct. So the other thing is we need to disable this button. So we'll say disabled is saving. So if it's saving, it's going to be disabled. Once it's completed saving, then the data will show. So we can say new title added, new description. So you can see it's saving, and then the title will be added. So you can either choose to do this, or you can use the optimistic updates, which is where you save the data before the response actually comes in. But this is how I would recommend for someone to do this. So that's it with creating an in form input. Then we have now the editing section. So the editing section is pretty much the same. The only thing, actually we don't need this result, so we can just get rid of this. So we'll just take that and then go to the editing section. So I will do this. So I'll just copy the same exact code. The only thing I would do is wrap that in that manner, put a slash there, and then put the ID, because as we are editing we need to pass in the ID. So we'll say the edit index, but this is not generally correct. There's something that is actually wrong with this, because we need to pass the ID of the note that is actually being edited. So we need to get the edit index. So number one, we need to get the note here. So the current note, I'll just define this as current note. So current note is equals to notes dot edit index. So let me just specify a new variable instead. Yeah, so current note is equals to notes, new notes and editing index. So should be current note dot ID. But of course this will fail currently, because as you remember, as we were specifying these nodes, rather as we were fetching the nodes, let me just go back. As we were fetching the nodes, we only passed in the title and the body. We did not pass in the ID, so we need to pass in the ID here. Now when you go back, our data will actually have an ID, so we'll be sending data to the API URL / the ID, and then now the method here changes to patch. So that's the method that we're going to be sending. The data, the headers are going to remain the same. The response data is going to remain the same. But of course now, with this change in data, we need to set nodes to be, we need to use this syntax instead, since we've already modified the notes that we are editing. This is going to be correct. Then finally we're going to set is saving to be false. So in this section we did not actually set is saving to be true, so we can say is saving is true. So you can see a recap is that we constructed the URL, set the method, set the headers, set the data that we're actually editing, and then we are going to set nodes now to be this new node, since we've already changed this. And I will remove this set nodes here, so that the nodes are only set when someone actually completes the editing process. So let's edit this node. So new description, and we have changed it. So we save the note, it's saying saving. Let's see, it's taking a bit of time. I think there's actually an error, so let's just see what happens. So this is the note, let's edit it, note body, and then let's see. So we have a console error. So it's saying that current note is not defined on line 41. So let's see. So it looks like we did not say current note. So let's see that. Then save the note. So we are saving, and the note has been saved. So if we go to the network, you can see we got a response that is correct. So something else that I noticed that this the data is being cleared even though the response has actually not succeeded yet. So that's something that we need to change, because the data should only be cleared if the result actually succeeded. So we can do this, we can put that note, the clearing of the notes there. That ensures that whatever we're editing doesn't actually change until the response actually succeeded. So if we would edit and then new title, you can see that it's only cleared once the response has been completed. So what we have currently done is we've implemented what we call optimistic updates, and that's currently how it is. Now there's no way for us to currently simulate a situation where this fails, but there are situations where, let's say we okay, actually this works, because even in the case of a failure, we actually don't set the nodes, so that is correct. So the API, if the API is fast enough, the user won't notice much of a difference. But yeah, that's how we implement that. The final API that we actually need to implement is the delete API. So I'm just going to copy that and then go to delete nodes. and then it will just be the same exact thing. The only thing is I'm going to copy the current note from here. So this is exactly the same thing. Current note, we are going to pass a delete action there. The headers are the same. We actually don't need a body in delete. The response is JSON, and now here we don't need any of this. The only thing is that we are going to carry all of this to the then statement here. So we are instead of set saving, we are going to define something else. Source is deleting, set is deleting, and then now when the user starts deleting here, we'll say set is deleting to true, and finally set is deleting to be false. That's it. So if we, the only thing now is we need to add the loading state on the deleting. So let me just go down here to the delete note, and is deleting, and if we are deleting, we'll specify, and then once that is done, we can now put in our x, which is going to be correct there, and we can put in our x there. So now if we say delete, okay, let me see, delete note is deleting, let me see, let's just check the console. It seems we have a console error. It's saying new notes is not defined on line 31. So let me check line 31. Okay, so now in this case this should be current notes, not new notes. Undefined reading ID. So let us see line 35. Line 35. So current note.id. So it looks like this doesn't show the correct ID. So I would love to see what the data actually looks like. So like I showed you, the best way to actually showcase how the data looks like would be to go here and say JSON.stringify, and then the actual note. So we can see there's actually an ID. The ID is actually being passed. So let's click delete note again. Then I just need to see whether the current note has an ID. So console.log current note, and then I will show the current note. So let's reload this so the current note is actually undefined, and there's something that I'm actually noticing with our code. If there's an error in any of the processes for this, the loading state remains in loading infinitely. So we can fix that by writing a try catch. So by moving this try, then we can say a catch. So in case there's a catch, just set the deleting to false. That means that just helps us so that we don't stay infinitely in a deleting status, as you can see. So now we are not currently we are not always in that deleting status. So now let's go here. So delete note index. Let's just console log the index just to see if the index is actually being passed correctly. Okay, so we are passing the wrong index here. I see why. The problem is that we're passing the wrong index. Okay, so now it's actually deleting correctly. All right. Okay, so this is just showing the correct information, and that is correct. So now I would just like to do the try catch everywhere. We actually need to wrap everything in a try catch, especially here. So try. So we will do this and then catch which set is saving to false. We need to do the same for here. Just let's say saving to false. Now a bonus thing that we would want to do is implement something called React Hot Toast. So the React Hot Toast just shows the notification. There's React Hot Toast, there's React Toast. There are a lot of libraries, Toastify. So let's just see. So it just shows you something has happened, which is usually shows just like a nice loading state. So I'll just go into the documentation. So npm. So I'm going to go back to my code. So npm install React Hot Toast. Then as the installation is being shown, I will go ahead and just look at what the documentation says. So it says toast.success, successfully toasted. So let's just go into the GitHub and just show you how you okay. So I'm going to import the toast here. So let me just import toast, and then this is all you need. So for example, once it is completed, so this is a success. So now I know that I can do something like that and say saved. So now we go back to the notes application. This is deleted. Let's see. Okay, our toast did not show up. Let's see the documentation further. So it looks like we have to also import this. We have to put in this correctly. Okay, yeah. So I'll show the toasts for when a note has been created, and you can write as many toasts, error, it failed. So that's basically how you can write the toast not updated. And now when you go back to new note desk, you can see that it's saving, the note has been created. So that's it. See you in the next tutorial. In the next part, we'll be styling the web application. We'll be adding Google authentication and adding components and props so that you can separate the app into different components. Stay tuned for the next part of this lesson.